Coming up, we'll break down what I believe is the most underrated position unit for the Irish in 2025, why we might see a big change to Mike Denbrock's offensive philosophy this season, and react to some major news on the recruiting trail. That's next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up? And welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And it is great to have you here with me on Wednesday, March 26th. And thanks for starting your day right here by making this your first listen of the day. Before we get rolling here, I'd like to ask that you please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. We actually just eclipsed 9,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is exciting, but the race to 10,000 marches on, and you can help us out with your support. Here's the plan for today's show. It's actually really simple. I have 3 questions written down, and we're going to dive into each one. Number 1, what is the most underrated position group on the team? Number 2, what role will tight ends play in Mike Denbrock's offense this season? Because we know that the tight end position has been a focal point for the Notre Dame offense really for decades, and there's a reason why they hold the crown of tight end U, but due to Mitchell Evans' departure and some unfortunate injuries over the years, we might see a significant shift in 2025. And finally, at number 3, where do things stand for Notre Dame in the class of 2026? It has been a slow start for the Irish in this class, but it looks like that could change in a hurry here with some potentially massive news on the horizon. So we're going to get to that in segment 3. Let's start with what is the most underrated position group on the roster, because when you do a daily show like I do here, it's hard for anything to fly under the radar at Notre Dame. Like, we're talking about Notre Dame football in late March. I talk about every single position group extensively. So it's not like anything just kind of slips by and no one notices, at least not anything that's of big importance like an entire position group. So I've been trying to think what position group might not be getting the credit that it deserves, even if we talk about it a good amount on this show. Well, it's certainly not the quarterback position, because I talk about it seemingly every single day. I would say that the quarterback position and the understanding of the talent in the room is properly rated. Not overrated, not underrated. I think we all know what's going on in that quarterback room. Running back, they're elite. We talked about it a lot on yesterday's show. I think it is absolutely the best position group on the roster. There are so many really talented players in that room, headlined by arguably the best player in college football in Jeremiah Love. I'm cautiously optimistic about the wide receivers. I don't think they're overrated. I don't think they're underrated. We just don't really know yet. We need to see Malachi Fields in the blue and gold before we make any big-time decisions about what the wide receiver room could be this season. Tight ends, I have my concerns, which we'll get to in segment 2. On the offensive line, I think that group can absolutely be special this season. I think they could be really, really good. Now, obviously, there are some things that need to be worked out, like where's Charles Jagasaw going to play, but I am very, very high on that group, so they can't be underrated, which leads me to the defensive line. And I actually believe the defensive line is the most underrated position group on the entire team. The defensive tackle, that's still a big question mark, because we don't know how productive Jared Dawson will be this season. But I think when you look at the unit as a whole, I have spent so much time talking about the questions about the interior that I have not fully appreciated what this group can be this season. Because when you look at the defensive ends, Notre Dame is hopeful that Boubacar Traore and Jordan Botelho are going to be ready to go by the season starts. So to me, this is a group that has a low floor, given the injuries, the lack of depth on the interior, but it also could have a really high ceiling, and I feel like I haven't talked about the ceiling enough. So this group could be really, really good this season, even though they lost 2 of their best players, Howard Cross and Riley Mills, to the NFL. Look no further than the Viper position. They are loaded, okay? So they've got Boubacar Traore, and if he's healthy for a full season, he could be a high draft pick at the end of this year. I think he is that good. He has an NFL frame. He's 6'4", 240 pounds, has extremely long arms, and he was very productive last year before he suffered that season-ending injury against Louisville. In just 4.5 games, he had 3 sacks, an interception returned for a touchdown, and a forced fumble against Miami, Ohio. It sucks that he couldn't redshirt last season. That half game eliminates the opportunity for him to redshirt last year, but probably not going to need it if he ends up being the player that I think he can be. And we might see him, get into the draft very early if he ends up breaking out this season like most people expect that he could. Again, very dependent on his health. Same thing with Jordan Botelho. How is he going to recover from his very serious injury that he suffered against Purdue last season? He's going to be a sixth-year senior, and it's crazy to think that Jordan Botelho is going into his sixth season with Notre Dame. But last year, he was on his way to having a career year before he got hurt. It was so disappointing to see him go down in that game against Purdue because he was dominant in that first half, and he was playing really well at the start of the season. I think he played better than any defensive lineman in that game against Texas A&M. Only played 2.5 games, had 12 tackles, a sack, and 7 quarterback pressures. He was dominant last year. He was playing better than Riley Mills and Howard Cross before he got hurt. So far, the return on what he's been doing in his rehab has been really, really positive. Rob Hunt went out of his way to praise Jordan Botelho for his effort to get back on the field. But again, I'll believe it when I see it, but I think that he could have a really good year if he's able to stay healthy. Then there's Junior Tuihalamaka, who's one of the most surprising players on the entire team last season. He was an absolute revelation for this defense, had 33 tackles, 3 sacks, 6 TFLs, an interception, and 2 fumble recoveries. He finished second on the team in quarterback pressures, and he started the season third string. And he's projected to be the third string Viper this year if Traore and Botelho can return to full health. But even if they aren't, at least they know that they've got Junior Tuihalamaka who can at least bridge the gap, if it takes a couple games for those guys to get back to 100%. Fourth string, I got to mention Logan Thomas. He's a sophomore with a really bright future, so they are very, very stacked at the Viper position. Now, on the strong side end, they have 2 really good football players over there as well. They've got Joshua Burnham, who I think was one of the most underrated players last season, had to cross-train at strong side end and Viper after Notre Dame was dealing with all those injuries at Viper, and he was playing hurt most of the season. Like, he suffered a pretty bad ankle injury against Northern Illinois. He might have been the only player that played well against Northern Illinois last season, but he still finished with 30 tackles and was tied for second on the team with 7 tackles for loss. Behind him, you've got Bryce Young, who's going to be a sophomore. I think he has legit superstar potential. He's still growing into his frame, but I said before on this show, I think he could be as good as Stephon Tuitt at Notre Dame. He really flashed in the playoffs. I think if he continues on his insane trajectory, he could be a monster for the Irish this season. And then behind him, true freshman, Christopher Burgess Jr., one of my favorite players in the class of 2025. Don't expect to have a big impact this season as a true freshman, but still a lot of depth on the edge. So much of it, though, depends on the health of Botelho and Traore, and so far, the news has been extremely positive. So if they're both 100%, Notre Dame could be really, really good on the edge next year. But as for the interior, there's a lot of pressure on Jared Dawson, the transfer from Louisville, to not only be a hit out of the transfer portal, but to be a big-time impact player for the Irish. The early reports on him have been pretty solid out of spring practice, but he also needs to be a leader of this unit. For the Cardinals last year, he had 7 tackles for loss and 4 sacks, but behind him, you've got Gabriel Rubio, who is actually, shouldn't say behind him, he's going to be starting next to Jared Dawson most likely. He's had an up-and-down career at Notre Dame. He's had some health issues, missed the spring semester last year, fought his way back not only on the football team, but into the university. And then as soon as he started in fall camp, got hurt. So really, he just needs to be healthy and active for a full season because I think he can be a really good player and he could take a big leap this year. So you're looking at those 2 guys, the projected starters. And then Donovan Heinisch is going to be the first guy off the bench. You know he's going to outwork anyone who lines up across from him. He had 4.5 sacks last season. For an undersized defensive tackle who's not even a starter, that is some special, special stuff. Also had the game-clinching sack against Georgia. So that is a guy you absolutely want to have on your team and a great player to have coming off the bench. Jason Onye's return is a huge deal. If he could provide anything for the Irish this year, that is a huge plus. He's very versatile, can not only play on the interior, you can move him out to the edge as well. He only played in 5 games last year. Before he stepped away from the team, he had 7 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack as a reserve. Behind him, who really knows? I have a lot of questions about what those guys like Elijah Hughes or Armel Mukam can contribute for the Irish this season. But I think the reason that they are so underrated is because the group lacks the star power, at least today. Like Boubacar Traore, Bryce Young, they're not household names just yet, but they could be here in the very near future. And collectively, there's just a lot of talent in this room. There are so many ifs when it comes to this group. Like, if Traore and Botello can get back healthy, if Jared Dawson can be the player we think he can be, if Rubio and Jason Onye can stay on the field for a full year, if Bryce Young can take that next step. These are all legitimate questions that we need to ask about the defensive line, but none of them are unrealistic. And if the answer is yes to all of them, or honestly, even a majority of these questions, the defensive line could go from being a question mark to a very legitimate strength on the defense and really the entire team in 2025. On the other side of the ball, Notre Dame is dealing with a position group that has historically been great, but is probably going to take a big step back in 2025. So how is that going to affect the rest of the offense? That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. So the second question I want to dive into on today's show is how big of a role will the tight ends play in the offense this season? The reason I've been thinking about this a lot lately is because of a quote from running back coach Jaywan Sider when he was speaking to the media this past weekend after one of the spring practices. He was asked about figuring out responsibilities with 6 running backs, 4 of whom have played before. And he was talking about playing to their strengths, but then he brought up a point about the big picture and he was unprompted. He said, quote, "Who's the Notre Dame of 2025? Are we going to be 12 personnel, 21, 11, 10? We haven't decided that yet," end quote. So if you're unfamiliar, 12 personnel has 1 running back on the field, 2 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. 11 personnel is the most common for most teams in modern football with 1 running back, 3 wide receivers, and 1 tight end. 21 personnel has 2 running backs on the field, 2 wide receivers, and 1 tight end. And 10 personnel is 1 running back, 4 wide receivers, and 0 tight ends, which Notre Dame has run maybe twice ever, or at least since the Charlie Weiss era, because they have not really had a team with 4 really solid wide receivers, and they've always had a great tight end. So because of that, Notre Dame has run a lot of 11 personnel and even more 12 personnel, at least compared to other teams around the country. Now, this could be an offhand comment from Sider, as most teams are still kind of figuring out their offensive identity to some degree at this point in the offseason. But I think there is something important in that message because traditionally Notre Dame has run a lot of 12 personnel. They have always had really good tight ends and they have lacked great wide receivers. When Tommy Rees and Jared Parker were the offensive coordinators for Notre Dame in recent years, that was basically their base defense. You think back to what Notre Dame ran in 2020, they were almost always in 12 personnel. Sometimes they'd even run 13 personnel because that team didn't really have a ton of great wide receivers. I mean, they had Ben Skoranek, Javon McKinley really broke out that season, but they had Michael Mayer, they had Tommy Tremble, and they also had Brock Wright. That's one of the best tight end rooms Notre Dame has ever had. So they ran that all the time. And that led them to an undefeated regular season and a berth in the college football playoff. Then when Mike Denbrock took over, they ran less 12 personnel than they had in the years before, but they still ran it more than a lot of other teams around the country. This year, I think they're going to have to run it even less than they have before, which means the role of the tight ends in this offense is going to be diminished. It's not absent, and it's certainly not going to be eliminated from the offense, but it's just not going to be what we've become accustomed to seeing when watching Notre Dame football play offense. So let's take a look at the state of the tight end room right now. Mitchell Evans is off to the NFL, even though last season wasn't as good as we had hoped for Evans going into the season. He still was very productive. He had 43 catches, 421 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns last year. It took him a little bit more time than maybe we expected to come back from the torn ACL that he suffered at the end, or I shouldn't say the end of 2023. It was late October against Pittsburgh in 2023, but I thought he could be a potential All-American last year. It didn't happen. He was still very good for the Irish last year, but they are also going to be without Cooper Flanagan this season because he ruptured his Achilles on like the third play of the game against Georgia. Just a really unfortunate injury for him. And even though he only had 4 catches last season, he played a lot. 262 snaps, most of which were as a run blocker, and he was expected to at least compete for the tight end 1 job this season. Now it's going to go to Eli Raridon. He has extremely high potential. I thought at one point he could be the next great tight end at Notre Dame, and maybe that's still true. We just have not seen enough of it yet to have a ton of confidence that he's going to have this all-time season this year. He's battled knee injuries throughout his career. He's already had 2 major surgeries on his knees, but last year was his first full season healthy. He had 11 catches for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns as tight end 2 last season. I think that he's going to be even better this season so long as he's able to stay on the field. But then behind him, a lot of question marks. You've got Ty Washington, the Arkansas transfer, who has played in 21 games in his career and has 14 catches for 212 yards and 4 touchdowns, but it's been up and down. He actually got kicked off the team at Arkansas. He's a very good blocker, and I think that, the ceiling could be pretty high for him. Notre Dame really needs him to be good. They got him before the Cooper Flanagan injury happened. Now I think they might even explore getting another tight end in the portal, especially if they want to run 12 personnel this season. They really need to get another guy because behind Washington, you've got Kevin Bauman, who's been around for a long time. He's going to be a 6th-year senior, but he has had so many injuries. It's so unfortunate, too, because he came in at the same time as Michael Mayer, and they thought that Mayer and Bauman were going to be awesome players for the Irish, but then it felt like every single year Bauman would suffer another brutal injury. But he's back this year, and I'm not sure if he's going to be more than just a depth piece, but it's going to have some veteran presence in the room, but I don't think Notre Dame is going to count on him to be a big piece of this offense. You also have Jack Larson, who's a redshirt freshman. He's undersized, but a really talented pass catcher. Has not really done anything for Notre Dame, barely played last season. And then you have the true freshman coming in, James Flanagan. He's the son of former Notre Dame star Jim Flanagan, and I am extremely high on James Flanagan. I think that he could be an impact player as a true freshman, but more of a blocker. He could eventually turn into a more well-rounded pass catcher down the road, but he has the size and the skill set and really the tenacity to be a good blocker at tight end in college pretty much right away. So when you look at this room, it's not loaded with star talent, kind of like what we've become accustomed to when watching Notre Dame play football and see all the tight ends that have come through, like Michael Mayer and Tommy Tremble, who didn't even have that many catches, but still was drafted in the 3rd round. John Carlson, Anthony Fasano, Troy Nicholas. There's so many that have come through Notre Dame in recent years, and I just don't think that you can really count on it this year. That's not to say that Eli Raridon can't be a good player. I think he absolutely can be, but I do think that you're going to see a shift in the way that Notre Dame plays offense this season, because even if Eli Raridon is good and has a really productive season, they just don't have the proven depth behind him. So it's really going to come down to Eli Raridon and Ty Washington. They're going to have to step up and be 2 reliable options for Notre Dame, not just in the pass game, but in the running game as well. If they're not, then they're going to have to run a lot of 11 personnel. So if that happens, then all of a sudden you're going to ask a lot more of your wide receivers, which, as we know, have been a bit disappointing in recent years. But they have some really talented guys who can play in the slot, like Jaden Greathouse, and they brought in Will Pauling from Wisconsin. Pauling has been a great slot receiver. He can move the chains, and I think his average reception is only like 9 yards, which might seem low, but that's really just what his role was for the Wisconsin offense, and there's a reason why Notre Dame went out and got him. You also have Jordan Faison, who plays the field receiver, but could play in the slot as well. Notre Dame liked to run screens for him last season, so I think Notre Dame is going to have to put a little bit more on their plates this season. Jaden Greathouse really excelled in those last 2 games of the season last year. He looks like he could be a wide receiver 1 for Notre Dame this year, but I think you're going to see a bigger impact in the run game, because it looks like, again, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but it feels and looks like the Notre Dame wide receiver room is going to take a big step forward this year. We've been talking about it for years. It feels like it's finally set up to happen this year. But I think you are going to see a big impact in the run game because Notre Dame really likes to run out of 12 personnel. They bring them in as extra blockers and heavy formations and just go big on big against the defense. But they don't have the benefit of having a big bruising quarterback who can run the ball like Riley Leonard this year. So I think what they're going to have to do is spread the offense out a lot more and try to run the ball in space. A lot of teams have excelled doing that. We just haven't seen Notre Dame do that as much. So a lot of this comes down to Eli Raridan. If he can take that next step and be an elite tight end, then maybe you don't really have to change all that much. You can still use the tight end as a safety net for whoever Notre Dame picks to be the starting quarterback. And if Ty Washington is as good of a blocker as we think he can be, then maybe Notre Dame just continues to run 12 personnel like normal. But those are a lot of ifs there, right? And if depth becomes an issue, if Eli Raridan gets hurt, if Ty Washington gets hurt, then Notre Dame is going to run a lot of 11 personnel, and we might see some 4 wide receiver sets, which is not something we have seen on a regular basis, at least in a really long time. Personally, I'd love to see Notre Dame run some 21 personnel, get Jeremiah Love and Shadarian Price on the field at the same time. You only need one tight end in that formation. And I think just the threat of Price and Love on the field at the same time is just so much on a defense. It's going to put a lot of stress on them. But we've talked about this before. Hell, I remember talking about it when Notre Dame had Audric Esme and Logan Diggs out there, and they just didn't really do it a whole lot. But maybe they changed things up this season. But overall, I think we're going to see a much more spread out offense this year than we have for Notre Dame in a long time. So Notre Dame's offensive identity might be shifting in 2025, but what about the future? Let's take a look at where things stand for the Irish in the 2026 recruiting class and whether they're setting themselves up for long-term success. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You could track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of judging multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
The last question we have to address on today's show is, where does Notre Dame stand in the 2026 recruiting class? And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a ton of concrete updates that are going to get you super excited. Like, we're not going to be talking about commitments that just happened on today's show, but there is potentially good news on the horizon. It kind of feels like you're waiting in line for a bar. There's some good stuff happening. You're hearing good things, but you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and it feels like you've been in line forever, and the weather is like 3 degrees outside, and it feels like you're finally about to get in, but you still have to wait for a few things to happen. I'm basically just describing my experience trying to get into Club Fever when I was a freshman. But in all seriousness, I think there's some very good stuff happening for Notre Dame on the recruiting trail. So right now, they have 7 verbal commitments in the class of 2026. It has been a quiet stretch for Notre Dame for a while. The last guy to actually commit was Tyler Merrill, the offensive lineman, and he is the only player to commit in the class of 2026 since Notre Dame appeared in the national championship. I think we all expected there to be like a slew of good news for Notre Dame after that magical run in the college football playoff, and it has not happened yet. But some major dominoes could be falling soon here with some top targets nearing their decisions. I'm actually going to have recruiting insider Eric Thomas on tomorrow's show to do a deep dive, but I wanted to provide some important updates to sort of set the stage for tomorrow's show. So the big news involves high 4-star defensive end Rodney Dunham. He just visited Notre Dame this past weekend, and Notre Dame absolutely knocked it out of the park. I know you hear that a lot with recruiting visits, but this one feels special. He's the number 33 player in the entire country, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, and he's the 4th ranked edge rusher in the class. He was expected to go on 5 visits this summer. After he visited Notre Dame, he set a commitment date for April 10th, which is a very good sign. And then a bunch of recruiting insiders predicted that he will commit to Notre Dame, like Steve Wiltfong from On3. He is on it, as well as a couple other local guys as well. I believe Tom Loy from 24/7 Sports also put in a crystal ball for him to commit to Notre Dame. And South Carolina was considered to be the favorite for a while. He even had some projections to commit there a while back. He's from North Carolina, so it made sense that he would stay close to home. But the fact that he canceled those visits and is setting his commitment date right after this visit to Notre Dame and all these predictions are coming in, that's a lot of very good signs. When there's smoke, there's usually fire, and there is a ton of smoke with Rodney Dunham's recruitment. Obviously, he still has to commit to Notre Dame, and then if and when that happens, then he has to stick around until signing day. But this is the type of player that Notre Dame has missed out on for a really long time, and it looks like they're getting close here to getting him in this class of 2026. But that's not the only top prospect that Notre Dame is after that they could be getting a commitment from soon. 4-star wide receiver Braden Robinson out of Texas announced his top 4 this past week, and he listed Notre Dame, Miami, Ohio State, and Arizona as his finalists. Notre Dame has been after him for a really long time. He's only 5'8", he's 160 pounds, but he has elite speed. He's already racked up 150 catches and nearly 2,300 receiving yards for his high school, and he's from Texas. He's playing really good high school competition. He plans to visit all 4 of his finalists this summer, with his final stop at Notre Dame on June 20th. He also expects to announce his commitment on July 20th, a month after his visit to Notre Dame. So it's great that Notre Dame gets to make the lasting impression, but will it be enough? Time will tell. It's going to be very hard to beat out Brian Hartline and Ohio State for an elite wide receiver, but Notre Dame is firmly in the mix there. They are also firmly in the mix for 4-star safety Joey O'Brien. Now, they are in an absolute battle with Penn State. O'Brien is a 4-star, top 100 player nationally. Notre Dame has been after him for a long time as well because he is a perfect fit for Notre Dame on the football field and off. He's 6'3", 185 pounds, but he is a Pennsylvania native, which makes Penn State a very real threat here. Some people think Notre Dame is in the lead. Some people think Penn State is in the lead, but Notre Dame likes where they stand. And I feel like if they land him, this is the type of player that they need at safety because safety recruiting has been very hit or miss in recent years. They got Jaden Blair last year. If they are able to get Joey O'Brien, those two could create a very dynamic duo in the back because Jaden Blair is 6'5", O'Brien 6'3". They're both crazy long, and I feel like that could be a really special tandem back there, and it would be a significant addition to pair with the existing young defensive backs that they have in tow. So that is another recruitment to keep an eye out on. I feel like Notre Dame is in good shape there. Then there's a guy like Jordan Thomas, who Notre Dame has been recruiting for a while now. He's a 4-star cornerback. He actually just made his visit to Notre Dame this past week, and I feel like this is the first time that Notre Dame has really been in it for Jordan Thomas, which is kind of surprising because he's from Bergen Catholic in New Jersey. That's the same high school that Steve Angeli went to. Notre Dame has had a lot of success recruiting guys out of Bergen Catholic, but Notre Dame really wasn't in the mix until now. I think Notre Dame made a great impression on him this past weekend, but Ohio State is also very much in the mix. And Notre Dame has not had a great track record winning recruiting battles against Ohio State. They got a couple more in this class and potentially a lot more with Jordan Thomas. Mike Mickens has done a really great job with this recruitment, and I would be thrilled if Notre Dame were able to get a commitment from Jordan Thomas. Let's talk about the tight end, Ian Pramer, 4-star. A long shot, I think, in my mind, but a potential huge get. Tight end recruiting obviously always matters for Notre Dame. And we talked about how the room is thinner than they've been in recent years, but now they're trying to get him out of Kansas. That's where he's from. He's considering Kansas and Kansas State. But Notre Dame needs 2 tight ends in this class. They tried to get 2 last year. It didn't work. They ended up with just James Flanagan, and they have not landed a top 50 tight end since Eli Raridan. That is the type of that is the caliber player that Ian Pramer is. He's number 42 player overall on the 24/7 Sports Composite. So time will tell with him. He's not one of your typical top high school recruits, who's posting constantly, talking about his recruitment all the time. He keeps things very close to the vest, but Notre Dame is firmly in the mix there. And there are just a lot of top targets that are nearing their decisions. And I think some are going to be heading to South Bend in the very near future. But remember, tomorrow, I got Eric Thomas back on the show, great friend of the program. We're going to go in depth on all the big updates for Notre Dame on the recruiting trail. They just had a big visit weekend. This past weekend, they have another one coming up. And I think that there are a lot of significant dominoes that are going to fall here in the very near future. But that is going to do it for this episode. Remember, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And if you enjoyed the show, give this video a like if you're watching along on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you rate the show 5 stars and leave a review. I know I ask about it in every single show, but seriously, it goes a long way in helping us out here, and I really appreciate it. But I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.